I watched the new Superman movie that released a week ago, and everyone's obviously been talking about it. So I'm here to tell you that the movie was very underwhelming and severely overrated, especially if you've seen all the ridiculous amounts of hype that came before its release. I think this movie is a prime example of why James Gunn is a terrible director to choose for the new DCU movies, because he's basically incapable of making movies that are not totally silly and just comically whimsical, at least when it comes to superhero movies. Before anyone tries to say it, no, I'm not a Zack Snyder fanboy or glazer. And if you really think about it though, did you really expect a director who made Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, and Guardians of the Galaxy to make a movie with any deep or intricate writing? The movie was made for the lowest common denominator viewer, the type of viewer who just wants to turn off their brain and enjoy a movie that has plenty of emotion and jokes, but not any actual substance. And it's crazy that I'm saying all of this about this movie because I was genuinely excited for it. I thought it was going to be excellent. It would be a great introduction to the DCU since I've been a DC fan for a long time now, ever since I was a little kid. So I was really expecting a lot and it just did not deliver. So anyways, for the structure of the video, I'm basically gonna quickly go over the events of the movie and I'm gonna point out the good and bad things that happen as I go along so you can really see how bad the movie progressively gets as it goes along. So the movie starts with Superman on the ground, bleeding, knocked out, and delirious, which ties into the movie's weird fixation with making Superman seem like a weak punching bag. But anyway, his dog then comes to help him up and basically drags him to the Fortress of Solitude, where he gets healed by sunlight with the help of his robots. And they really emphasize the fact that the sunlight healing process is meant to hurt him and cause him pain, which I think is a terrible choice, especially since they already make him look weak enough throughout the movie. Like, as I'm about to show you, he's constantly taking a beating and getting mollywopped 90% of the movie, where someone else comes in to save him, sometimes even a civilian. Like, I get he's supposed to be for the people, but he's still one of the most powerful beings in the universe. It's absolutely ridiculous that they're trying to nerf him this hard so civilians can feel like they're just like him when they actually aren't. So anyways, after he gets healed, he goes back to Metropolis to fight the robot. I'm not gonna lie, at the time watching it, I was pissed. Because I thought it was just a robot that was whipping Superman. But it actually turns out that it was just a clone. Which I guess makes more sense, but it is still kind of lame. And it kind of makes him an underwhelming villain in general, in my opinion. Especially compared to General Zod from Man of Steel. So the robot clone and Superman fight, and the clone has its way with Superman and beats him to the ground. So then civilians crowd him while he's down and are right in the battle area just standing there, which is another extremely stupid trope in this movie that really pissed me off, but I'll get to that later on. And then the robot clone returns to Lex Luthor victorious after the fight. And by the way, Lex sent the clone at Superman in the first place because he's mad that Superman is trying to make peace with the country Lex is supplying weapons to. I think the country's name is Baravia, but in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter like that, I'm not gonna lie. And since I've been trashing on this movie so much, I'll give it a slight compliment. The actual cinematography of the fight scene was done well, and it was just tainted by the writing. So then the story shifts to the next day where Superman is shown as Clark Kent looking super unassuming, which is accurate to the lore. Then they show Lois and Jimmy Olsen, and yeah, there's really nothing important to say about this. So yeah, then Lois and Clark go home together. And in this movie, they've been together for 3 months. They're not married, but they're in a relationship. And they decide to do a mock interview to help Superman's public perception. And this is the scene that I specifically remember for being so cringe in a bad way. It was a very hard watch seeing Superman get so emotional and triggered so easily while Lois was the calm and intellectual one. And I even remember the specific scene that just put me off so much. It really feels like the movie is just devoid of any real masculine figures. And make no mistake, this is not on accident. Everyone who isn't a conformist or a normie knows that liberalism hates masculinity and is trying to get rid of it in all media, especially superheroes nowadays. So that scene really sucked, but trust me, it gets worse. So the story then shifts to Lex Luthor arriving in Antarctica and infiltrating the Fortress of Solitude and making a mess of the place and neutralizing all the robots in there. They also get the best of Superman's dog Crypto, but he'll be back. And they get a hold of the message from Superman's parents, which he then uses to do a hit piece on Superman so the public turns on him, which will happen later on in the movie. So, back in Metropolis, Lex's henchmen release this alien monster into the city that's supposed to grow into a gigantic creature overnight. The next day, it does in fact get bigger, and it shows Superman trying to get Krypto out of the way while fighting the kaiju monster. This is where Krypto starts to get annoying because he's not helping anyone, and Superman clearly does not have his priorities set straight at all in this fight, as you'll clearly see as the fight goes on. While Superman's in battle, civilians are just crowding around him, nervously just standing there, taking pictures and watching. I really don't have to explain how stupid and immersion breaking this is, because this really just shows how goofy and childish this movie is. I mean, these are the same civilians who are putting themselves in harm's way by their own choice, by the way, that people expect Snyder Superman to save without any casualties at all while saving the day. You see how stupid that sounds? So Superman is fighting this monster and saving people at the same time, which I don't inherently have a problem with. It's just the way that they did it that makes it so dumb. On another note, I wish they portrayed Superman the way he normally is canonically through the comics, because then he'd be able to throw the kaiju into space with ease. But of course, they just had to make him more grounded. So, anyways, back to the scene. The Justice Gang shows up to help Superman, which consists of Hawkgirl, Green Lantern, the Guy Gardner version, and Mr. Terrific, and they're all fighting together in the middle of Metropolis. This is where the dumbest scene in the whole movie happens. It's when Superman stops fighting this Megaton monster destroying buildings to save a squirrel. Yes, you heard me right, and no, I'm not exaggerating. This version of Superman is so sensitive and so soft, he has to save a squirrel over saving human lives and preventing severe property damage. The worst thing is that the common opinion is that this represents what Superman is supposed to be and that this is comic accurate. And if you object or disagree to this premise at all, they will say that you don't actually like Superman. It doesn't matter how many comics or books you've read or how many shows you've watched. If you don't agree, you hate Superman. This is the type of revisionist history that is going to happen in the DCU, and you will be gaslit for calling it out. So, anyways, through the efforts of the Justice Gang and Superman, they take down the kaiju and take it away. And this is when the news broadcast projects the message that Superman is actually here to destroy and conquer the human race. This message was obviously brought up by Lex through the info he got at the Fortress of Solitude, but it doesn't matter because just because of this one news headline, the whole public opinion immediately shifts, and everyone that he just saved now turns on him and heckles him into hiding. I wish I could say this was unrealistic and stupid, especially since he's been a hero for like 3 years, but this might actually work in real life. So then he flies to the Fortress of Solitude to regroup, and when he gets there, he finds out that his place got wrecked. He also realizes that his dog is missing, and instead of looking for it, he zooms back to Metropolis and interrogates Luthor in the wimpiest way possible. He basically just throws an emotional fit at Lex, while Lex is just standing there unmoved. It's really just a cringe moment and another example of Superman being way too overly emotional. So, after talking with Lois, the next day Superman decides to turn himself in to the US government, who outsourced Lex Luthor to handle supernatural matters. I do not know why the hell he would turn himself in to the guy who wanted to kill him, tarnish his name, all just to keep profiting from a war. Superman is getting to the point where he is just so nice, to the point where he's naive and just plain stupid. So they immediately seize him and take him to this weird pocket dimension where they have this mini prison of Lex's political enemies and also just some random aliens. I find it really weird that the movie decides to be ultra sci-fi and fantastical all at the same time, while having a grounded and weaker Superman. It doesn't mix at all, and it makes Superman seem even more lame because of how many powerful beings and mystical items can take him out. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, they put him in one of the chambers and make this alien prisoner, who has the power to transform into any known material, turn into kryptonite to further weaken Superman, basically incapacitating him for a while. At the Hall of Justice, the Justice Gang is there just hanging out, and then Lois Lane somehow gets a hold of them and begs the Justice Gang to save Superman from the pocket dimension. Mr. Terrific agrees to help, and they storm Lex Luthor's base and take out all his goons to get to the entrance of the Pocket Universe portal. Back in the Pocket Universe, the shape-shifting alien, whose name is Metamorpho by the way, has a change of heart and refuses to be controlled by Lex. He then changes his arms from being kryptonite to being a yellow sun, which in turn heals Superman enough to break out of the prison cell. Superman frees Metamorpho's family. Lex was holding them as blackmail, and he also frees Crypto, who is also stuck in the pocket dimension. They try to escape but are stopped by Luthor's guards, and they narrowly get back on Earth and out of the pocket dimension prison. Superman is very weak again and is nursed back to health by his Earth parents. He gets a pep talk from his dad, who is alive in this version by the way, who basically tells him to be himself and be a good person. How insightful, right? On the side, Lois discovers that Lex wants Baravia to be at war with the other country that is an allegory for a certain country so that he can get land to make his own country after Baravia supposedly wins. They switch the scene to show Baravia lining up troops at the border and the other country's civilians protesting the war. It's pretty funny in a stupid way that the good and bad guys are so comically clear, especially since it's supposed to be an analogy of a certain conflict happening right now. And it's also dumb that the leader of the country is willing to allow its citizens to get plowed by the troops at the border just to prove the point that they're being peaceful. There's even a scene where there's an innocent kid crying for Superman's help in the middle of a conflict, but I'm getting ahead of myself. It turns out that Lex created a rift in the earth that came from the Pocket Universe, by the way, because he wanted to frame Superman for the destruction of the world or something like that. The rift tears through the city, destroying buildings, yada yada yada. There's one scene that I want to talk about that is just so goofy to me. So Lois and her news crew are trying to escape the Daily Planet, which is crumbling to the ground. They end up acquiring a ship, and Lois is the one that's able to successfully fly an aircraft to safety. It's just so crazy to me how Lois keeps being inserted into places she has no business being in. I mean, why the hell would Mr. Terrific even bring a human with no combat experience or any technical or science experience to a pocket universe? And why the hell would Lois even know how to fly a complex aircraft in the first place? I mean, she's creeping into Mary Sue territory at this point. Superman saves a bunch of people from the destruction, and then he meets up with Mr. Terrific. Superman gets into a fight with the clone and the metal girl. I think her name was the engineer, something like that. The clone and the metal girl are beating the hell out of Superman, which is just not fun at all to watch, man. It's honestly depressing watching one of the most powerful beings in the DC universe get trampled over and over. But anyway, the Metal Girl finds a way to flood Superman's lungs with nanites. Superman eventually fights her off, but it is not pretty at all. I'm not even sure you could consider it a real W, especially the way it went down. In the process of killing the Metal Girl, Superman crashes into a subway that's deteriorating into a giant rift, the one that Lex created, and he crashes there with the clone guy and they get into a huge fight that goes all around the city. Meanwhile, at the Baravian border, the Baravian troops are getting ready to take over the other country, the one with innocent civilians, when the Justice Gang comes just in the nick of time to save the day. It's weird that in this world the heroes are supposed to be for the people, but they're clearly overstepping their boundaries by interfering in foreign affairs. Obviously in this case they made the situation as black and white as possible, but nobody actually asked or voted for them to be in any form of political leadership. So they are really just enforcing the idea that heroes will end up doing whatever they want, good or bad, if they don't work with the government, essentially becoming dictators at that point. But anyways, the Justice Gang beats the troops to nobody's surprise, and they even add Metamorpho, the shapeshifting guy, to the group at the end of the fight. The scene then shifts to Lex Luthor, who's giving this giant speech about how he hates Superman and how much better he is than Superman. This really encapsulates how feminized they made Lex in this movie, because if you've watched any DC animated shows or movies, or even the comics, you know that Lex is supposed to be this stoic mastermind with a vendetta against Superman. He normally has many contingency plans and is more preserved and thoughtful than the current one we have.
Vengeance is a sucker's game, son, and yours can only be achieved at the cost of your own life.
The Lex in this movie is always throwing emotional tantrums, and the casting they chose makes Lex look so unintimidating and childish, it really just sucks. But anyways, after Lex's cringy speech, the way the fight ends between the clone and Superman is so anticlimactic and stupid, it genuinely made me hate this movie. So in the subway, Superman is getting absolutely bashed by the clone when Superman notices that Lex is giving the clone orders through these drones. With this knowledge, instead of destroying them himself with his heat vision or something, he whistles for Crypto to come and save his behind by destroying the drones for him. This might not seem like a big deal, but this dog has been constantly taking up so much screen time and being the center of attention for a lot of the movie. At first it was cool, but it progressively got more and more annoying. So by the time this scene happened, I was so pissed that Crypto was the one that saved the day and not Superman. So without Lex's help, the clone is now weakened in the fight, and through a tough battle, with the help of the dog of course, Superman ends up winning the battle against the clone and manages to throw him into the black hole rift, finishing him off. Mr. Terrific, through the power of plot armor, engineers a way to stop and reverse the rift and return the Earth to normal. Lex is exposed for his shady actions, and everyone lives happily ever after. They even tease Supergirl at the end of the movie, but who really cares about that, honestly? If the movie wasn't good, what makes you think Supergirl is gonna be good? But anyway, that's the end of the movie. This movie really just sucked, man. There was so much bad stuff that I didn't even get to talk about yet, too. For example, this movie was littered with millennial humor and corny jokes. The other thing that sucked was that there was basically no cool characters at all, except for maybe Mr. Terrific and Guy Gardner. The rest of them were straight cornballs, no exaggeration. The subtle liberal messaging in every modern movie now did not help this movie either. This movie genuinely disappointed me, and I would give it a 3 or 4 out of 10. The only positive was the cool cinematography, I guess. And if you think this movie sucks, do not let anyone gaslight you or bully you into saying otherwise. On that note, guys, I'm gonna end the video. Let me know in the comments what you think was the worst part of the movie, and a like and subscribe would also be much appreciated. Thanks for watching, guys.